What is up? My name is Matt, working for Cinematography Database, and today we're going to be continuing our look at Cinematography Composition 101, and today we're going to be looking at a concept or framework that I call small house, big house as it relates to focal length. I've got my Wacom pen, and I've got some renders straight out of Cinedesigner. So to start this off, we're looking through a virtual C300 and we're on an 18mm. Just so that you know, we're going to be using the zero tilt rule for this entire tutorial. If you don't know what that means, go watch the video entitled Zero Tilt. But we're looking through the C300 at the 18mm like I said, and we're going to be keeping this headroom and this bottom of the frame here. We're going to be keeping this consistent, this framing throughout the entire tutorial. The only thing we're going to be changing is the focal length and the distance from the camera to the talent. As we're looking through the 18mm, some things to note right now are that the house in the background, you can see the entire thing, and it's relatively small in the frame. Now we're going to jump up to a bird's eye view, and we can see a virtual version of our camera here. We can see a representation of its field of view or frustum. You don't have to really worry about that word. It's kind of a 3D thing. But we can see a visualization of what that camera sees. We see that it's very wide on a wider or lower number focal length. Coming back down to horizon level, we can see how close the camera really is to the talent to get that framing on an 18mm. It's pretty close. We've now changed to a 35mm from our 18, and we can see in the background that that house has gotten a little bit bigger. But again, we haven't moved the talent closer to the house. All we've done is back the camera up and zoomed in a little bit. From our bird's eye view, we can see that the field of view has gotten narrower, and we're going to be seeing less of the background. Back down at ground level with the 35mm, we've seen that to keep the same composition, the same head to waist composition as before, we've had to move the camera back a little bit. This is a trend, it's going to continue. We're now looking through our virtual C300 with a 75mm lens, and we can see now that the house is getting much bigger. It's actually almost bigger than the talent in frame. Actually, it is bigger than the talent. So this is one of the things that happens as you start to zoom in, but we're going to talk about that at the end. From our bird's eye view, we can see that the field of view is narrowed quite a bit. It's getting much narrower, and we're seeing less of the background. At ground level, we are really backing up from the talent to keep the same framing. These are things that are important to realize as you're framing up. Looking at our last focal length, the 135mm through the C300, the 135 is a very traditional full frame 35mm portrait focal length. It looks really good, but what we're looking at now is that the house is gigantic in the background. It is way bigger than her. It's like twice as big as her. It's way outside of the frame. There's also probably going to be a lot of depth of field, or very little depth of field, meaning it's going to be a really blurry background, but that's not what we're really looking at right now. From the bird's eye view, you can see that the field of view of the camera is very narrow. We're only seeing about half of the house. And on ground level, the camera is kind of like ridiculously far away from the talent to do a medium shot. Okay, so let's look at the progression of these shots, and then we're going to sum up what we've seen and what we've learned about focal length. So this is the ground level view, and we're going to be paying attention to the distance from the talent to the camera as we zoom in and keep the same composition. Here's the 18mm, here is the 35mm, the 75mm, and the 135mm. And what is the trend here? The trend is to keep the same composition on the talent from head to waist. As we've increased the focal length, we've had to physically back up the camera. From the bird's eye view, we're going to be looking at how the field of view of the lens or the camera gets narrower as we zoom in. So here is the 18mm, pretty wide. We're seeing the house and some of the trees. Zooming in or increasing the focal length to 35mm, we're now only seeing from the fence to the tree. Zooming in again to 75, now we're only seeing middle of the house to a little bit outside of the fence. And finally, at 135mm, our field of view is very narrow of the background, especially compared to our 18mm in the beginning. And to wrap this up, we're going to be looking through the lens, and we're going to hopefully understand why I called this concept small house, big house. Look at the house. With the 18mm, we're seeing a lot of the background, and the house is relatively small in the background. We also see the entire house. Zooming into 35mm, we're still seeing a good amount of the background, but the house is getting much bigger. It pretty much doubled in size. Going to the 75mm, the house is now bigger than the whole frame. We can't even see the entire thing. And at 135, the house is now gigantic. It's way bigger than the frame can hold. It's bigger than our talent. The house has gotten gigantic. So that is the small house, big house concept as it relates to focal length. Essentially, as we zoom in or increase the focal length, the background gets bigger. And we can think about that as the house getting bigger, whatever makes sense to you. If you like this video, give it a like below and subscribe to the channel. We've got a lot more coming. I'm having a lot of fun with this Composition 101 series, and I'm also excited to get to the 201 where we start moving the camera and looking at some more advanced applied things. I'll be doing these primarily in Cinedesigner, but I'm also going to be moving into the real world and filming a little bit more with that. It's just a little bit easier visually, I think, to actually learn this with a kind of simplified cartoon version, in my opinion. In the comments below, have you noticed this phenomenon on your own? I think a lot of cinematographers have. Do you like the concept, the name Small House, Big House? I kind of like it. The reason I ask is because I'm going to be compiling a lot of these videos eventually into a book, and this chapter or sub-chapter would be called Small House, Big House, so I just want to make sure that the names are cool and they make sense to you. And as always, you get out there and plan better, shoot better.